News of the Times. The murder of Vera Page, a case that science couldn't solve. Welcome to News of the Times. It was December 1931, and London lay under a blanket of damp, creeping fog. Gaslights trembled in the murk, and the faint sound of Christmas carols drifted down from the better streets of Notting Hill. But in Addison Gardens, where neat terraces met shadowed mews, the season of goodwill was marred by something far darker. 10-year-old Vera Page, wearing her red coat and beret, had left her aunt's house only to collect her swimming certificates. She never returned. 2 days later, a milkman found her body beneath a shrub in a quiet garden off Addison Road, less than a mile from where she'd last been seen. London awoke to headlines of horror and a mystery that would grip the nation. Within hours, Scotland Yard was summoned. Superintendent Cornish and his men fanned out across the capital, interviewing witnesses, checking addresses, and tracing every possible lead. Newspapers marvelled at the scale of it. It is computed, wrote one report, that these officers have travelled an aggregate of 200 miles a day seeking interviews and following up statements. Before the inquiries would end, the figures were astonishing. Over 5,000 miles travelled, nearly 100,000 words written in official correspondence, and more manpower than most murder cases of the decade combined. As one journalist noted, few mysteries of recent years have involved such tremendous effort in solution, and still fewer crimes have been marked by such atrocious brutality. And yet, for all that effort, for all the fingerprints, fibres and forensic hopes, the answers would remain just beyond reach. But before we close, we turn, as ever, to our further particulars segment, where the absurd and the unfortunate tend to collide. This time, a Victorian envelope cutter, a billiard ball, and a party trick with no escape plan. Spoiler: the trick was not repeated. Now, if all this sounds like a little slice of your nan's famous banana bread with custard on the side, comforting, curious, and just a little bit suspicious, do consider liking, subscribing and sharing it with that one friend who keeps a medical dictionary by the bed and exhibits a morbid curiosity about historical pathology. We think they'd fit in rather well. So, top up your teacup, draw the curtains against the fog, and settle in. The case is about to begin. London, in 1931, was a city of contrasts, modern on its surface yet still steeped in Edwardian shadows. The wireless crackled in well-lit drawing rooms, while in the tenements of Notting Dale, gas mantles hissed faintly in the cold. Trams rattled along new motor cars. Boot polish and petrol mingled in the air, and the city's pulse, a rhythm of factory whistles, barrow cries, and Westminster chimes, beat on through the fog. The scars of the Great War still lingered, not only in the limping gait of returned soldiers, but in the quiet austerity of everyday life. Bread was cheaper, yes, but so were wages. Soup kitchens dotted the East End. Queues stretched outside labour exchanges, and yet in the West End theatres still sparkled, and the Savoy served oysters beneath glittering chandeliers. Policemen walked their beat with heavy capes and wooden truncheons. Telegraph boys darted down alleys with urgent news, and in the winter months the smog rolled in early, a yellow-grey haze that clung to the rooftops, softened lamplight and made strangers of passers-by. It was a city bustling forward, but uncertain of its footing, a city where the past could still be found in the corners, and where, on a December evening in Notting Hill, a child could vanish in the space between two doorways. Forensics in 1931, Promise and Peril. By 1931, the world of crime solving had changed. Gone were the days when justice relied solely on a sharp-eyed constable and a suspect's confession in a smoky interview room. A new era had dawned, one of fingerprints, fibre analysis, and the forensic pathologist's scalpel. Science had entered the courtroom, and with it a growing sense that no crime could remain unsolved if only the evidence were read correctly. In Britain, forensics had become a trusted weapon in the arsenal of law, a methodical, rational force amid the uncertainties of witness memory and circumstantial doubt. Bloodstains were now typed, minute particles from clothing or carpet were examined under glass, pathologists timed deaths to the hour, if not the minute, and behind it all stood figures like Sir Bernard Spilsbury, whose unshakable testimony had helped convict prisoners, stranglers, and those whose crimes would otherwise have gone undetected. But forensic science was still young. Its methods, although impressive, were often unstandardized, and its results not always as definitive as they seemed. The science was often built on probabilities, not certainties, although it was rarely presented that way in court. The microscope could detect, but not always explain. The lab could reveal, but not always connect. And in the case of Vera Page, the limits of this young science would become painfully clear. Fibres, stains, and chemical traces would offer clues, but no resolution. Experts would disagree on interpretation. Results would remain tantalizingly inconclusive. And the confidence placed in forensic certainty would, for the first time, begin to flicker. From the Daily Mirror, the 17th of December 1931, hunt for murderer of a 10-year-old girl. Body hidden under bushes in garden of a London house. Strangulation, death. Child who vanished after leaving aunt to go home to tea. Mother prostrate with grief. Scotland Yard officers were last night conducting an intensive search for the murderer of little Vera Page. The girl, aged 10, disappeared from her home in Notting Hill on Monday evening. An SOS was broadcast and a search party organised. Her body was yesterday found hidden under bushes and covered with leaves in the garden of a house in Addison Road. The child had been attacked and strangled. It is believed the crime was committed elsewhere and the body carried to the garden in a motorcar. Milkman's tragic discovery. I saw a hand protruding from the bushes. The body of Vera Page was found under a tangled mass of undergrowth in the garden of a house in Addison Road, Kensington. There were head injuries and the child had apparently been strangled. Soon after the discovery, the police communicated with the child's parents at Blenheim Terrace, Notting Hill. Vera was their only child. She had been missing since Monday. The discovery was made by a milkman, Joseph Smith, of Primes Road, while going around his rounds in Addison Road. I was walking up the pathway to the house, he stated, when I saw a little white hand sticking out from under a mass of evergreens. on what looked to be a blue bundle under the bushes. I was too scared to investigate further. I told the cook and then dashed off for the police. Garden searched. The police summoned a doctor and no one was allowed to approach the house. Superintendent Cornish and other detectives soon arrived in a flying squad car, and for over 2 hours they scoured every inch of the garden, measuring distances and hunting for clues and footprints. Mrs. Isabel Page, the girl's mother, said that her daughter came home from Lancaster Road School on Monday afternoon, a little after 4:30 p.m. She went off shortly afterwards to fetch 2 swimming certificates she had left at her aunt's house. She said at the time that she was hungry and would be back for tea. Mrs. Essex, the aunt, whose house is only 200 yards away from the dead girl's home, said Vera stayed only a few minutes and left at 4:50. Mrs. Page, the girl's mother, was yesterday prostrate with grief. Relatives came to try to comfort her, and her husband, Vera's father, stated that she was his only child. She was a fine little lass, he said, with tears in his eyes, and I could not imagine anyone wanting to do her harm. She was full of fun and life, and was the joy of our hearts. The police have not yet determined how long the body had lain in the bushes. The fact that in the darkness the milkman did not notice it when he passed along the path leading to the house at 5:30 may suggest that the body was not there at the time but was placed there afterwards. Superintendent Cornish was assisted in his investigations by Superintendent Nichols from Scotland Yard and Divisional Detective Inspector Mallet, who is in charge of the division. So far, the police have not been able to discover a motive for the crime. Vera Page taken to a spot where the body was found. This is supported by the fact that her clothing was dry, while the position in which the body was found suggested that it had been taken from a car and simply dropped on the ground. Vera Page was either persuaded by a stranger to go with him or was kidnapped in the street in which she lived. Her body was not found till 36 hours later, and it may conceivably have been in the bushes in Silwood Lodge for a long time. Strong girl. Vera Page was a sturdy girl and could scarcely have been carried to the spot where her body was found without someone's attention being attracted. Much depends on the results of the post-mortem, for if the approximate time of the murder can be established, it will materially assist the police in their investigations. Mr. Jack Page, an uncle of the murdered girl, said Vera was a very intelligent girl. She had been warned more than once by her father never to talk to strangers in the street, and she was not in the least the sort of child to be decoyed by offers of sweets. She was very rarely left Blenheim Crescent alone except to go to school. She was a strong child. But even with the full force of Scotland Yard behind the case, with officers working in shifts, retracing routes, checking alibis, and knocking on doors well past midnight, the answers did not come easily. By the end of the week, over 200 detectives were actively assigned to the case. Suspect vehicles were being tracked, local garages were combed, the girl's entire life, friends, teachers, neighbours and distant acquaintances were reviewed in painstaking detail, and still the fog of uncertainty lingered. Yet from among the exhaustive searches and garden reconstructions came one small but compelling discovery: a blood-stained finger bandage. It had been found where Vera's body had been hidden, a single sinister trace that hinted at a struggle. The working theory was grim, that Vera, in fighting for her life, had scratched her attacker, perhaps drawing blood. The bandage, hastily wrapped, may have been dropped as the body was placed in the shadows. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in a case where so much remained unspoken or unclear, the bandage would soon become one of the most closely scrutinised clues in Scotland Yard's investigation. From the Daily Mirror, the 18th of December, 1931. Man with a scratched face in murder mystery. Police theory of injury inflicted by Vera Page before the assailant overpowered her. Garden crime reconstructed. Scotland Yard detectives investigating the murder in Kensington of 10-year-old Vera Page were stated last night to be hot on the trail of her assailant. Inquiries were directed to the finding of a man with a scratched face, as it is believed the child injured her assailant in the desperate struggle she put up before being overpowered. While reconstructing the crime in the garden of the house in Addison Road, where the girl's body was hidden under bushes, the police found a blood-stained finger bandage. This is regarded as a valuable clue. Lines being followed by Superintendent Cornish of Scotland Yard and over 200 detectives in the attempt to solve the mystery are the questioning of known people of unusual tendencies, a hunt for suspect cars, and a house-to-house inquiry among mothers in the district. So far, these inquiries have been without a tangible result. Detectives conducted a comb-out of local garages yesterday, and a list of the numbers of various suspect cars had been taken. A check has also been made on motorists suspected of enticing little girls into cars. It is now established that the crime was committed some distance from where Vera was found, probably in a building, and was taken to the garden in a car. Her body was covered with bruises, and the injuries suggest that a desperate struggle took place before she was overcome. Mr. Charles Page, the dead girl's father, visited Ladbroke Grove Police Station yesterday and was in conference with Detective Inspector Mallet for over 2 hours. The whole of the girl's life was reviewed in an effort to identify the murderer with any unusual incident in the last year or two. The police are undoubtedly up against one of the most difficult mysteries they have ever tried to solve. New district well. Murderer chose most suitable spot for hiding the body at night. Whoever disposed of the body must have known the district very well. At Silwood Lodge, the lamps are shaded by trees and the shrubbery. Being at the corner of the road is at night always in deep shadow. There is indeed no spot along the whole of Addison Road that is more suitable for hiding a body at night. The inquest on Vera Page will be opened at the Paddington Coroner's Court this afternoon. As the week drew to a close, Scotland Yard's vast efforts began to narrow. Theories were taking shape. Leads were being chased down with renewed urgency, and then a shift. Quietly, the focus turned towards a particular individual, a man known to the police, not formally charged, not arrested, but under scrutiny. That Thursday night he was invited to Notting Hill Police Station for questioning. He would remain there for nearly 18 hours across 2 days. At the same time, other clues were beginning to surface, and with them the chilling sense that pieces of Vera's final jewellery were starting to reassemble. A red beret, a pyjama cord, and in the garden of dark secrets of West London, torchlit flickered against the shrubbery as detectives searched once more for answers. The picture was far from complete, but Scotland Yard were closing in. From the Daily Mirror, the 19th of December 1931. Murdered girl mystery. New developments. Torchlight search in the garden. Detectives investigating the Kensington murder of little Vera Page made several fresh discoveries yesterday, including the finding of the red beret worn by the dead girl when she disappeared on Monday evening. This was picked up by two women in the area of a house in Stanley Gardens, Notting Hill. Stanley Gardens is only a short distance from the garden in Addison Road, where Vera's body was found on Wednesday, hidden under the bushes. Another development was the return to Notting Hill Police Station of a man who had spent 4 hours there with detectives on Thursday evening. Police officers called for him in the early hours of the morning, and he accompanied them to Notting Hill. After a further 14 hours at the station yesterday, he went home shortly before 10 p.m. Mrs. Rush of Talbot Road, Portobello Road, Kensington, yesterday made the following statement to the Daily Mirror. My husband, Percy Orlando Rush, aged 41, was invited by CID officers to accompany them to Notting Hill Police Station at 9 o'clock last Thursday night. We've been married 10 years and we are extremely happy. He is a cleaner at a big London store and served in the King's Royal Rifles in the war and has suffered from shell shock. We have no children. 2 clues. There was again activity at the police station where Superintendent Cornish received statements from a number of persons, many of them relating to the conduct of men in the neighbourhood during the past few days. 2 important clues which the police are considering are the finding of a button in the pocket of the jacket the girl was wearing, and also a pyjama cord which has come into their possession. It will be recalled that apart from marks on the girl's throat attributed to strangulation, there were no signs that some ligature had been placed around her neck. But even as this search widened, as gardens were combed, statements logged, and suspect movements retraced, the trail remained maddeningly faint. Scotland Yard had a man. They had questions, but they did not yet have answers. And now, with witness accounts proving inconclusive and neighbourhood whispers yielding only shadows, it was time for the forensic scientists to step forward. Samples were gathered, clothing seized, fibres, stains and debris carefully catalogued. Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the Home Office's leading pathologist, worked alongside Dr. Roche Lynch, the department's analytical chemist, as the evidence was examined under laboratory light. But what they found would only deepen the puzzle. From the Daily Mirror, the 21st of December, 1931, mystery of Vera Page deepens. Is vital information being withheld by someone? Detectives investigating the murder of Vera Page, the 10-year-old London schoolgirl whose body was found in the garden of a house in Addison Road, were last night without a definite clue. Many houses in the district were visited yesterday and many more statements taken. Superintendent Cornish expresses the opinion that vital information is being withheld from the police by people who know something of Vera's movements after she disappeared from her home last Monday evening. Stains on a suit. It is known that there have been attempts to molest children in the neighbourhood, and this is a line of inquiry to which the detectives are paying considerable attention. They are endeavouring to obtain descriptions of men from other schoolgirls, and it is possible that the information thus collected will prove the missing link in the chain of evidence. Sir Bernard Spilsbury and Dr. Roche Lynch, the Home Office analyst, have examined stains on a suit taken by detectives from a house in Notting Hill. It is understood that a statement was taken from a man who is said to have known the dead girl and had spoken to her last Monday. From the Daily Mirror, the 22nd of December, 1931, fresh Vera Page clues. Search made by police at a London tube station. Fingerprints. Photographs taken of a knob on a cellar door. A dramatic development in the search for the murderer of Vera Page, the 10-year-old London schoolgirl, took place last evening. Microscope on suit. Police await experts reporting searched examination of clothes. It has been discovered that a coal cellar near the spot where Vera Page's red beret was found was left open, and detectives have made a thorough search of these premises. Particular importance was attached to the doorknob of the cellar, and photographs have been taken of it in the hope that fingerprint traces may be revealed. While the search for clues and the comb out of gardens and disused sheds in the district continued, Superintendent Cornish was more interested in the outcome of the investigations at the Home Office laboratory, where experts have been engaged in minute examination of a suit of clothes. It is understood that the clothing has been subjected to a further searching examination at a hospital in London, where experts made microscopic inspection in an attempt to discover clues which may help the police to carry their case forward. Up to a late hour last night, the report from the Home Office had not been received. As 1931 gave way to the new year, the official inquest into Vera Page's murder had already been postponed multiple times. Each delay was granted in the hope that Scotland Yard's relentless investigations, with every lead pursued, every cellar searched, might still uncover the missing piece of evidence that would bring her killer to justice. At one point, detectives turned their attention to a disused coal cellar near Vera's own street. There, bolstered by statements from two local women who claimed to have heard a child's cry on the night of the murder, they briefly considered a chilling new theory that Vera had not been killed elsewhere and brought to Addison Road, but had met her end closer to home, hidden perhaps in a local cellar for a time before being moved. But the evidence proved elusive. By early January, despite the enormous resources deployed, police confidence was waning. The inquest, formally adjourned yet again on January the 29th, had become a symbol not of progress, but of the growing doubt surrounding the case. In the absence of witnesses, and with the streets of Notting Hill offering little clarity, the case of Vera Page soon became a proving ground for early forensic science. Every thread, stain and bruise were examined under gaslight and microscope in the hope that science might sneak where people could not. Dr. Bernard Spilsbury, by then a towering figure in forensic circles, examined Vera's clothing for clues. Under magnification, he identified what he believed were black wool fibres that, he suggested, bore a resemblance to those found on a blanket in the suspect's flat. There was also flax-like strands, which police theorised could have come from a chair in the same room. But while suggestive, these were visual comparisons only, drawn from a method still in its infancy, and far from the rigour of today's trace fibre science. Chemical tests were also performed on Vera's clothing, including an ammonia-based reaction test, then a cutting-edge method for detecting traces of seminal fluid. Although discreetly handled in press reports, there was little doubt that police were investigating the possibility of a sexual motive. Yet the limitations of the test were poorly understood. The proteins it detected could just as easily have come from perspiration or post-mortem handling. In today's terms, the results would be deemed inconclusive and inadmissible. But in 1931, they fueled quiet but persistent speculation. Spilsbury also gave his trademark time of death estimate, narrowing it to the early evening Vera vanished. His assessment was based on the condition of the body and the presence of moisture on her skin and clothing. But later critics would note that her body had likely been washed or at least exposed to wet conditions, factors that made any estimate highly uncertain. Yet in 1931, the public and indeed the courts rarely questioned Spilsbury's certainty. Even the small bruise on Vera's forehead was examined with forensic intent. Spilsbury interpreted it as evidence of a deliberate blow, perhaps used to render her unconscious. But there was no corresponding wounding or swelling, and modern analysis might just as easily consider it a minor injury from a fall. As with so much in this case, the conclusions were formed not just from evidence, but from interpretation and from a near religious belief in the infallibility of science. And so, with suspicion focused, but science still unsure, the long-delayed inquest into the murder of Vera Page was finally allowed to begin. From the Daily Herald, the 11th of February 1932, Percy Rush in dramatic duel. An inquest on Vera Page. Coroner and some singular facts enticed by somebody who knew her after. After a dramatic duel between the coroner and one of the witnesses, Mr. Percy Rush, the jury at the inquest of Vera Page at Paddington yesterday returned an open verdict of murder against some person or persons unknown. Vera Page, an 11-year-old schoolgirl who lived with her parents at Blenheim Crescent, Notting Hill, was found strangled in the garden of a house in Addison Road, Kensington, on December the 16th. Crowds were waiting at the doors of the court nearly an hour before the inquest started. The coroner, Mr. Ingleby Oddie, recalled the circumstances in which Vera Page was last seen. He explained that after being seen by 4 people, she was observed by a little girl at about 5 o'clock, looking in a shop window at the corner of Blenheim Crescent. She was found dead 2 days later behind the tradesman's entrance of number 89 Addison Road, and she had been laid down probably that morning. There are marks on each side of the neck, Mr. Ingleby Oddie added, which showed that she had been strangled by hand. She had been violated, and there was a mark across the front of her throat, probably made by a cord, and her beret is missing. She had 2 or 3 spots of candle grease on her right shoulder, just under her overcoat, and in the crook of her right elbow there was found a finger stall consisting of a bandage and a piece of lint. It had evidently been drawn off the finger of a man, probably as he drew his hand from under her arm. It had come from the finger of a person who had suppurating or discharging wounds on his finger, and it was noticed by the police who discovered it that it had a peculiar smell, which, when tested, proved to be the smell of ammonia. That is the only clue that the police have had on which to work. Relatives of Vera Page all say that she was a shy and retiring girl, not likely to speak or go with any stranger. It would be a reasonable inference that the person who enticed her away was someone whom she knew, and somebody probably living in that location. Police hunt with tooth comb. 1,000 statements from the district. The police have taken more than 1,000 statements, and the whole district has been gone through with a small tooth comb. Out of all the people from whom they have taken statements, there is only one person who knew her, and whom she knew, who was at the time of the murder said to have been wearing a finger stall on the little finger of his left hand. This man, whose name is Percy Rush, had a wound on his left finger and was wearing a finger stall. The wound was suppurating, and what is very strange is that he worked with ammonia. He's a flannel washer, and he lives at Talbot Road, directly east of Blenheim Crescent. He lived on the top floor of the building with his wife. Rush was wearing a bandage on his left little finger, and he was a man who knew Vera Page, and he went for a walk to see his father in the house, 22 Blenheim Crescent, and had in fact a key to let himself in. Statements have been taken from Rush, said the coroner, and he will be called and may satisfy you that the facts that he was wearing a finger stall about the time this girl disappeared were a mere coincidence. The police have had the spots of candle grease on Vera's coat examined and compared with the candle found at Rush's house. They agree, continued the coroner. Of course, that may not mean much, because there are hundreds and thousands of candles in London that might correspond to the grease found on this little girl's coat. On Rush's overcoat were found stains. A woman would tell them that when she was crossing Holland Park Avenue, which leads from Addison Avenue into Holland Park Gardens, she saw a man wheeling a barrow. On that barrow was a bundle. The wrapping used for the bundle was a red tablecloth. The barrow was being wheeled in the direction of the place where the body was found. The woman gave a description of the man which, to some extent, tallied with the appearance of Rush. The police went to Rush's house, and there they found a red tablecloth similar to the one described by the woman. A pyjama cord. That may be a coincidence, said the coroner, and an absolute mistake on the part of the woman. She has had 2 opportunities of picking out Rush and failed on both occasions. Therefore, she may be wrong when she describes the person with the barrow as being similar to Rush, and he may have had nothing whatsoever to do with the crime. In Rush's pocket was found a pyjama cord. He is engaged in a laundry, said Mr. Oddie, and he may well have the opportunity of picking up a pyjama cord and putting it in his pocket. It is singularly, particularly in view of the marks found upon the girl's neck, which may have been caused by something in the nature of a pyjama cord. It may not have been used for the purpose of strangling the girl, but for pulling the body. When Vera left home, she was wearing a beret. When the body was found, there was no beret, but a beret was found in the area of a house in Stanley Crescent, close to where Vera was last seen. Curiously enough, the beret smelt of paraffin, although Mrs. Short, who found it, said that it had not been near anything containing paraffin. Mrs. Short picked up a piece of candle in the area. In the area there is an empty cellar. Coal dust was found on the body and the finger stall, and there was coal dust in the cellar. The cellar was not used by Mrs. Short, who lives in the casement, the coroner added. How did the beret come to be in this area, and what is a piece of candle doing in that area? Did the murderer take the child into the area knowing there was an empty cellar there? And did he assault her? Did she cry? And did he then strangle her and put her in the cellar? It would be possible for that to have happened, because about the hour this murder took place, the only people in the basement were Mrs. Short and her family, and they have a loudspeaker and gramophone going every night. Sir Bernard Spilsbury said the girl's body could only have been where it was found a few hours. He thought death must have taken place not very long after the child was missed. Dr. Roche Lynch, analyst from the Home Office, gave evidence as to the bandage and the grease. Charles John Miles, age 17, washhouse boy at the laundry, said that the last time he saw Rush with the bandage on was on a Friday. He did not see Rush wearing a bandage on any day during the week of the murder. At the inquest, a workman of Percy Rush testified somewhat reluctantly that he had noticed a dirty bandage on Rush's finger on the very night Vera disappeared. Although vague at first, he ultimately confirmed his earlier police statement under questioning from the coroner, who remarked pointedly, "It has been dragged out of you, but is it correct?" The witness agreed. Meanwhile, Margaret Key, a local woman, describing seeing a man pushing a barrow that evening carrying a bundle covered with a red tablecloth, but when shown a similar cloth later recovered from Rush's home, she hesitated. The colour matched, she said, but the fringe is not. Both testimonies added to the unease, not quite enough to confirm guilt, but just enough to keep the shadow of suspicion alive. The spotlight finally turned to the man Scotland Yard had quietly scrutinised for weeks, Percy Rush, a 40-year-old cleaner who lived near Vera Page's home. Described as a short, thick-set man with a fresh complexion and horn-rimmed glasses, Rush entered the witness box under caution. The coroner reminded him that everything he said might be used against him. Rush nodded. "I don't mind. I'm quite satisfied." From the start, his answers wavered. He admitted knowing Vera, even speaking to her once, but insisted he wouldn't have recognised her on the street. "She's never made herself familiar with me," he said, despite telling police earlier that she was a nice little child he had seen playing outside. When pressed, Rush reluctantly admitted that he had recognised her photo in the paper after her death. The contradictions hung in the air. Then came the question about the bandaged finger. The detailed police had quietly pursued for weeks. Rush claimed he had injured it days before the murder and had stopped wearing the bandage by Monday, but his story shifted. First, he said the bandage was stained with pocket dust. Then, when reminded he had cleaned flues, he admitted there had also been soot. When confronted with the ammonia smell on the bandage found near Vera's body, he explained vaguely that he'd wanted the wound to harden and didn't protect it during work. The coroner leant forward. "Was not that bandage yours?" Rush said, "No." "Do you know it smelt of ammonia?" Rush smiled faintly. The coroner snapped, "Don't smile. It's nothing to smile at." There were further inconsistencies. Rush couldn't explain the coal dust on his trousers, even though he was the only one with access to the coal cellar, the very place some now suspected Vera's body may have been hidden before being moved. The coroner asked plainly, "So, if something were locked up in that cellar, no one would know except you?" Rush replied, "Yes, that's right." He denied meeting Vera that night, swearing on the Bible he had not. He also denied wearing a bandage after Saturday, although witnesses contradicted this. When asked why on the night of the murder he hadn't visited his nearby parents as usual, Rush said simply, "I wanted to look at the shops." After the questioning concluded, the coroner described the case as bristling with difficulties. The jury retired, and when they returned, they delivered a verdict that echoed the frustrations of the investigation. We find an open verdict of murder by person or persons unknown. And just like that, the strongest suspect walked free. For all the searching, the speculation, the thousands of miles travelled and statements taken, the inquest returned an open verdict. Legally, Percy Rush walked free, but the court of public opinion is a harder one to satisfy. His testimony, cautious, inconsistent, and at times oddly rehearsed, left many unconvinced. His explanations for the bandage, the ammonia, the stains, all technically plausible, but never quite persuasive. And so, despite the law's inability to charge him, the shadow remained. Rush was quietly dismissed from his job, his wife too let go, and the whispers continued in shop queues and on the street corners that someone, somehow, had slipped the noose. In the weeks that followed, Rush offered a theory of his own, one that, to him at least, explained the strange sightings, the mistaken identities, and the trail that always seemed to lead back to him. He believed he had a double, a convenient explanation perhaps, although one that failed to convince Scotland Yard. From the Daily Herald, the 12th of February 1932, "I have a double," said Mr. Rush. "I am convinced that I have a double." Percy Rush, one of the principal witnesses at the inquest on Vera Page, made this statement to a Daily Herald representative at his mother's house in Blenheim Crescent, Notting Hill, yesterday. "I believe I've seen the man who is my double," Mr. Rush went on. "A few days ago I collided with a man in the street. He apologised and went off, but I just had time to see that he may have been mistaken for me." "That's what we all think, that Percy has a double," Mrs. Rush interposed. "For 22 years. I've been married to Percy for 10 years, and we were courting for 12. If anyone knows him, I do," Mrs. Rush continued. "If I thought he had murdered Vera Page, I should leave him today because I should be afraid that the same might happen to me, and I've told Percy that." "My wife is the dearest little brick of a man could have," Mr. Rush responded. He put his arms around her and added, "I've 3 sweethearts, my mother, my wife, and my wife's mother." Percy Rush has lost his job. "I've asked to be reinstated," he went on, "but they say there's no vacancy. I'm going to have a rest week because I'm one mass of nerves. Then I'm going to look for work. The police warned me on Saturday that I should be wanted at the inquest, but they didn't tell me what it was going to be like. I suppose they thought that if they told me too much, I should fly from the country. Why should I fly? I've no reason for hiding myself anywhere. I shouldn't have known Vera Page if I'd seen her in the street. I am short-sighted, and people look different when they have their outdoor clothes on. I saw her only once when she answered the door to me." "I'm glad it's over," Mr. Rush said, "when I went to the inquest yesterday and they asked me questions. I didn't know what it was all about. But my name is cleared." Mrs. Rush told the Daily Herald that she is also without a job. She was employed for many years by a firm of cleaners, but on account of slack trade, all married women employees have been dismissed. "I expect Percy will be able to get another job soon. He's so experienced." Mrs. Rush referred to the charge of indecent behaviour of which her husband was recently acquitted. "This charge made me believe more than ever in the existence of a double," she said. "Percy would never do a thing like that. He's a very nervous man with little mannerisms which might make people suspect him. But he is the last man in the world to behave in the way suggested. He's a very kind man, and he's very fond of children. The evidence. Despite the open verdict, Scotland Yard's investigation had circled almost from the beginning around one man, Percy Rush. The case against him was never formally made and never officially dropped, but in the forensic and testimonial fragments left behind, a picture emerges. A man known to Vera Page, a man with an injured finger at just the critical time, and a man whose trousers were soiled with coal dust, and who alone had access to the coal cellar near where police believed Vera's body may have been temporarily hidden. Witnesses have seen him wearing a bandage on the Monday, the very day Vera vanished, and then not again until her body was found. A blood-stained finger bandage was discovered near the scene, later shown to carry traces of ammonia, the very chemical Rush used in his cleaning job. He admitted to discarding several homemade bandages, but claimed they had simply become soiled with pocket dust. That same evening, a woman in the area reported seeing a man wheeling a barrow with a suspicious bundle, something large, wrapped in a red tablecloth. When shown the red tablecloth later found in Rush's home, she said the colour was similar, but the fringe was different. She was also twice unable to positively identify Rush as the man she had seen. The fibres found on Vera's clothing, black wool and flax-like strands, were said to resemble those in Rush's home, but in truth, this was interpretation, not proof. No fibre analysis by modern standards was undertaken, and the visual comparisons made under the microscope lacked objective rigour. Rush's timeline of the day Vera disappeared was hesitant. He said he walked home from Kensington, avoiding his own house because he didn't like going into an empty one. He claimed that the route placed him within a few hundred yards of where Vera was last seen, but he insisted he'd never have recognised her in the street. When confronted with a statement where he said he knew her and had seen her playing outside, he backtracked, claiming poor eyesight and unfamiliarity. At the inquest, his answers were uneven. He contradicted himself on the bandages, on whether he'd seen Vera, and on why he hadn't visited his parents that day, as he often did. His explanation: he wanted to look at shop windows. Asked outright if the blood-stained bandage found near Vera's body was his, Rush denied it, but his voice shook. And when the coroner noted that the bandage smelled of ammonia, Rush let a faint smile pass across his face, prompting a sharp rebuke. "Don't smile. It is nothing to smile at." Rush was not formally charged. The jury returned an open verdict, but in the eyes of many he remained the man who had not been proven guilty, only unproven. He lost his job, and with it any hope of anonymity. What went wrong in the Vera Page case? Despite the colossal effort, over 5,000 miles travelled, 100,000 words of reports, dozens of officers working day and night, the murder of Vera Page remains unsolved. And while the case showcased the ambitions of forensic science in the early 1930s, it's also laid bare its flaws. Fibres, inference without proof, black wool fibres and flax-like strands found on Vera's clothing were said to resemble materials from Rush's home, but the science of fibre comparison was, at the time, entirely visual. There was no databases, no chemical profiling, no objective thresholds for what constitutes a match. The links were suggestive, not conclusive, and modern experts would now call this method interpretation masquerading as science. Bandage and ammonia inconclusive associations. A blood-stained finger bandage was found near the site where Vera's body had been dumped. Rush had a finger injury, used ammonia in his work, and had discarded multiple homemade bandages, but no definitive test proved the bandage was his. Its presence was suspicious, but not forensically nailed down. Spilsbury noted its odour and condition, but again, without modern chemical or DNA analysis, it was circumstantial at best. Time of death uncertain and overstated. Spilsbury gave a time of death estimate consistent with the early evening Vera disappeared, but her body had likely been washed or stored in a damp or cold condition, which would affect cooling and decomposition. No attempt was made to control for these factors, and yet the estimates were taken as gospel. Today, such a time range would to be seen as highly uncertain. Chemical testing of clothing. Primitive methods. Vera's garments were suspected to what was then considered cutting-edge chemical analysis to detect seminal fluid. The test relied on ammonia-based protein detection, which cannot distinguish between bodily fluids, perspiration or contamination post-mortem. In a time before serology or DNA, this was science grasping in the dark, but presented in court with confidence. A clash of forensic styles. Behind the scenes, even the experts were divided. Dr. Roche Lynch, the Home Office's own analyst, reportedly questioned some of Spilsbury's interpretations, a rare glimpse of dissent in an otherwise deferential system. For the first time, Spilsbury's traditional visual-based methods, bruising patterns, fibre matches and body cooling, were set alongside newer laboratory-driven approaches. The chemical analysis of Vera's clothing was handled by Dr. Roche Lynch, the Home Office's chief analyst, whose conclusions, particularly on the presence of seminal fluid, introduced a new layer of scientific ambiguity. No direct conflict between the two men was reported, but it was clear that forensic science was evolving, and Spilsbury's once unquestioned certainty no longer stood alone. Eyewitness ambiguity and memory failures. Witnesses contradicted themselves on seeing bandages, on recognising suspects, on timelines. Some accounts, such as Margaret Key's recollection of a man with a red-covered bundle, were vivid, but the key object, a red tablecloth, didn't match the one later shown to her. No testimony proved solid enough to form a chain of custody or crime. Lack of physical evidence or clear crime scene. Vera's body was likely moved post-mortem. There were no conclusive locations of death, no murder weapon, no traceable vehicle, no reliable sighting of the killer. Without these anchors, all forensic results remained floating, compelling but unmoored. Ultimately, the Vera Page case became a cautionary tale, a collision of hope in science and the stubborn limits of what science could then deliver. The murder investigations may have been one of the most extensive of its time, but scale alone cannot guarantee resolution. As months turned into years, what remained was not a solved crime, but a question that refused to fade. In later interviews, senior detectives at Scotland Yard were asked about the great unsolved crimes of their careers, the cases that never left them. Time and time again, the same answer emerged. They didn't lack suspects, they lacked proof. In each of these lingering mysteries, and Vera Page was amongst them, The police believed they knew who had done it, but belief is not evidence, and suspicion, however strong, is not a conviction. And so, in the record books, the case remains open. The file sits unsolved. The science spoke, the statements were taken, the streets were searched. But the law requires certainty, and certainty in this case never came. Further particulars. And finally, we return, as we so often do, to that hallowed corner of the Victorian press where logic takes its tea with a faint splash of brandy and common sense appears only by appointment. This week's further particulars comes to us from the Illustrated Police News of November 1893, where a young man in Soho met an unfortunate end, not through crime nor misadventure, but through a party trick gone quite spectacularly wrong. If you've ever looked at a billiard ball and thought, I wonder if that would fit in my mouth, you're not alone. But as one envelope cutter discovered too late, it's not a question best answered in front of a crowd at the Carlisle Arms on a Wednesday night. From the Illustrated Police News, 11th of November 1893, choked by a billiard ball. Dr. Thomas held an inquest on the body of William Cole, 24, an envelope cutter of Amberley Road in Paddington. William Bushnell deposed that on Wednesday night the deceased, witness and others were at the Carlisle Arms in Bateman Street in Soho when the conversation turned upon the tricks which each could perform. The deceased said he could put a billiard ball in his mouth and close his teeth. He shut his teeth and then appeared to be choking. Witnesses and the others struck him on the back and turned his head down in the hopes that the ball would fall forward. It did not, however, and Cole was removed to the Middlesex Hospital. Witnesses had seen the trick done dozens of times before, successfully. Dr. Hulk, house surgeon, deposed that the deceased was dead on his arrival. Witness by his finger discovered that there was a hard foreign body at the back of the throat, which proved to be the billiard ball produced, blocking up the upper portion of the man's air passage. Death was due to asphyxia by choking. Accidental death. If you've enjoyed our dive into Victorian forensics, modern mysteries and the occasional bandage that smells of ammonia, do consider giving us a like, a share or even a subscribe. And if you're feeling particularly limber, you might even try something radical. Click hype, which, we're reliably informed, is not a new yoga position or a 1930s cough medicine, but a digital gesture of approval. It's the button that says, more of this, please. If you'd like to support this channel and get early, ad-free access to all episodes, plus over 500 historical true crime cases, deep archives and exclusive bonus content, you can join us on Patreon for the princely sum of just £5 a month. That's less than a Victorian penny dreadful and rather more educational. Your support helps us keep the lantern burning and ensures that history's forgotten cases, strange footnotes and curious particulars keep reaching curious minds. There's a 1-week free trial, no obligation and full access from day one. We'd be very glad to have you with us. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, Night Fog Liaison Officer and Assistant Deputy of Unsolved Murders with Inconvenient Lack of Evidence. And can the last person out please turn off the wireless and check behind the shrubbery, just in case.